Hey everybody, on Monday I did a video on the coronavirus because apparently there's nothing else going on in the world right now, I guess. But it was a really important topic, so I really wanted to get some words in from an expert on this, somebody who's really been following this kind of thing for a long time. So I reached out to David Quammen. David, if you saw Monday's video, is the author of the book Spillover, Animal Infections in the Next Human Pandemic. And it came from some reporting that he did with National Geographic following some teams who were tracking Ebola across Africa, as well as some other outbreaks around the world. He kind of took this experience and turned it into this book. I shared some of the clips of this interview with David in the video on Monday, but there was a lot more that we talked about. He had a lot of really cool points that I couldn't all get in that video, so I'm sharing the entire interview here. But before you watch it, I do have a couple of caveats. So I talked to David at the beginning of my research, which means two things. One, I asked a lot of really dumb questions because I was still very early in my research. This was kind of part of that. And two, a lot has changed since we talked. But I think he brings an interesting perspective to this whole thing, and he makes a lot of really good points about, where viruses like this come from, how they actually make the jump into humans, and what we can expect in the future. But anyway, I'd like to thank David again for his time. This was a really fun interview to do, and for the rest of you, just sit back, get comfy, and enjoy this conversation with David Quammen. But yeah, so are you getting called to do a lot of interviews? Is this like day in, day out right now, or?
Yes.
Yeah? Wow.
Since when did this start? I guess we all became aware of it maybe second or third week in January. The
Yeah.
watchdogs became aware of it on New Year's Eve, I know. That's when the emerging virus science guys that I know got the alarm bell that there was something happening in Wuhan, China. And we started to hear about it in mid-January. I did an op-ed for the New York Times that ran on January 28th. And I've been swept up in it ever since then. I was in Tasmania for 3.5 weeks doing research for another book, and I ended up spending half my time in Tasmania doing interviews with Radio
Oh,
New
yeah.
Zealand and China Television and various different things. So
Yeah.
anyway, yes, I'm one of the many, many people who is pretty busy with this thing.
Well, so much has changed just since we agreed to do this interview in the
Yeah,
last week. Just in the last few days with state of emergency, officially a pandemic, NBA is canceling everything. you know,
yeah, yeah. March Madness, the
yeah,
NC2A tournament is canceled. The Masters is canceled, even that's held outdoors, but big crowds.
yeah.
Um, Outdoors is good for viruses because UV light kills viruses, but
Oh,
still,
okay. Interesting. Well, before we get into all that, I would love to just kind of start with you. And you do a lot of work for National Geographic, right?
yes,
Okay.
yeah.
When
For
I
the
was a
last 20
kid,
years,
oh, okay. When I was a kid, I thought that would be the coolest job of all time. Like you've got to be the most interesting guy at every party you go to. Um, but then after taking a good look at your book and everything, I'm like, no, that sounds like a nightmare. Like everything about that sounds like nothing I want anything to do with.
which book was this?
Spillover.
Spillover, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's a little bit of that was researched for a story in National Geographic that ran in 2007 called Deadly Contact.
Okay.
But I was interested in the idea in the subject of emerging viruses before that. So when they asked me to do a story on it, I said, yes, it just so happens that I was hoping you'd ask me to do that. And I did research in the Congo forest and in Australia and in Cambodia and at the CDC for one magazine story. That's one of the great things about working for National Geographic, at least at that period of time. Things are changing constantly there too.
Yeah.
Um,
Does it open a lot of doors to say you're with them?
it does open doors.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um, you can walk into a cholera hospital in Dhaka, Bangladesh, and knock on the door of a busy doctor and say, I'm the guy from National Geographic. And he's likely to say, oh, well, come on in and give you an hour. If you say, I'm the guy from Harper's Magazine, he says, what?
Right.
Although I've had a great time working for Harper's Magazine in the past and
Yeah.
in other magazines. But National Geographic, yeah, is a global brand that people recognize. But
Yeah.
the downside of that is sometimes they say, "Oh, you're the guy from National Geographic. Come on in. I love your channel." And the writers all cringe when they say
uh,
that. Magazine writers cringe when they hear that.
yeah. Or they think that like you're like you own the channel or something like that. Like I
Yeah.
used to work at the Dallas Morning News. I live here in Dallas, and I worked in the advertising side, so I wasn't even a reporter or anything. But whenever people heard that I worked there, they're like, "What's your beat?"
Yeah. The Dallas Morning News. It's got a nice ring to it, of course. It's
I
one of
mean,
those papers.
it sounded kind of cool.
So what did you say? Crime?
News stuff. Well, I was a headline writer, so I guess my beat was trying to sell furniture or something. Not really that important, but well, so what was it that got you so excited or interested, I guess, in excited is a weird word to use, in the virus?
What got me excited, what got me interested, deeply interested, is uh, ecology and evolution.
Okay.
Um, I read the New Yorker stories that became the book The Hot Zone by Richard
Right.
Preston when they ran in the New Yorker. Might have been the first thing I ever heard or read about Ebola virus. Like a lot of people, I was mesmerized by those two wonderful magazine pieces.
Mhm.
By the book, not so much. Um, so I started to read about emerging viruses, and I wrote a few things about it. And I wrote a little bit about Ebola, and got to know some Ebola scientists. Got more and more interested in that. And then in the year 2000, I was on an assignment for National Geographic, walking across essentially the forests of the Congo Basin with a wonderful American explorer, conservationist, biologist named Mike Fay, who was doing a 2,000-mile survey bushwhack through the forests of Central Africa.
Wow.
And I was following him for weeks at a time and doing 3 stories. And at one point, we walked through Ebola habitat, and we knew it was Ebola habitat because there was a famous Ebola outbreak among people that had occurred on a village at the edge of this forest block. So we knew Ebola was there in this forest, living in, all viruses must live in cellular creatures. So it was living in presumably an animal,
Mhm.
species unknown in this forest. And we were walking through it. And that focused my mind. That got me very interested. It was spooky, but it was fascinating. And what I was interested in is, as I said, the ecology and evolutionary biology of viruses. It turns out they do have ecology and evolutionary biology. Ecology, well, viruses have to live in cellular creatures. So some of them live in animals. And then when we come in contact with those animals and kill them and butcher them and eat them, we come in contact with those viruses. And sometimes it becomes a pandemic virus for us.
Mhm.
That's ecology. Evolution is the fact that viruses evolve. Whether or not they are living things, there's no question that they evolve by good old-fashioned Darwinian natural selection, the survival of the fittest, variation among populations, limited resources, competition. The result is adaptation. That's natural selection. So anyway,
Well, so I
ecology.
imagine being there where it all happened really clarifies all that. I mean, it's a very
Yes,
abstract thing from over here, you know.
yes, it became very concrete.
Yeah.
I write about this in Spillover, my book on this. That on that leg of the expedition was about 10 days of walking through this Ebola forest, and we walked in river sandals and shorts, bushwhacking through the jungle, sleeping on the ground in tents at night, crossing swamps, crossing blackwater streams up to our waist, with about a dozen Gabonese guys as the forest crew, carrying most of the heavy equipment, carrying the food, carrying the tents. Mike Fay in the lead behind one guy with a machete cutting a hole through the forest. So the guy with the machete, the point man, and then Mike Fay with his notebook, and then me with my notebook. And then the rest of the guys stayed back an hour behind. And sometimes there was a great photographer on this project, Nick Nichols, and he was with us sometimes, but he was also shooting in other parts of the forest on sort of stakeouts at other times. So we went through the forest that way. Um, so now we're going through this Ebola forest, and around the campfire one night, we always ate around a campfire. A couple of guys on this Gabonese crew start talking about when Ebola struck their loved ones in this village on the river just east of where we were, started telling me about it. Killed 5 family members of one guy. He was holding his niece when, essentially when she died, bleeding, and telling these horrific stories in this small village. And then one of these guys said, oh, and they were talking in French. And my French is so-so, but Mike Fay was helping me with the French. At one point, this fellow said, oh, in the forest, when this Ebola outbreak was killing the people in our village, Sofiano and I, his friend, saw a pile of 13 dead gorillas nearby in the forest. And I said, what? This went into my notebook immediately. 13 dead gorillas, a pile of 13 dead gorillas. And I knew enough about Ebola then to know that Ebola kills gorillas and chimpanzees ferociously, just as devastating to them as it is to humans. So this pile of 13 dead gorillas outside of this Ebola struck village represented to me, concretized for me, this reality that diseases pass back and forth between species, viruses pass back and forth between species. Gorilla disease, human disease, same disease. And ultimately, it comes from some other animal that carries it without being devastated, without being killed. That's the reservoir host. Maybe it's a bat, maybe it's a rodent, maybe it's something else, maybe it's a spider. Nobody knows still. Ecology, evolutionary biology. And that's really the moment when I got book scope interested in the subject.
Yeah. So when you heard the story about the 13 dead gorillas, and I remember hearing about that in the book, they already knew that they could die from Ebola, and that just kind of like snapped something in your brain, and you're like, oh, that's the crossover, the spillover event.
Well, that's not the spillover, but it's part of this chain. For instance, that particular outbreak that had happened in their village nearby. Let's see, I was there in 2000. That was probably July of 2000. I still have that notebook. And this outbreak occurred in 1996, if I recall. So it had only happened 4 years earlier. It had begun with some young boys from the village going out to hunt for meat in the forest with their dogs. And they came back with a chimpanzee, a dead chimpanzee. And they said, hurrah, hurrah, we've got this meat. People in the villages there do eat chimpanzee, and they're desperate for protein. Bushmeat, right? So they come back with this chimpanzee, and then suddenly everybody starts to get sick. Everybody who helped butcher the chimpanzee, everybody who helped cook and eat the chimpanzee got sick. And some of them were taken down the river to a regional hospital. Some of them stayed in the village. I think about 30 people died, terrible fevering deaths, not necessarily as bloody as you've heard about, but terrible deaths.
Right.
And then the disease detectives came in their white hazmat suits to investigate this, and they did the epidemiological sleuthing, and they heard the story about the chimpanzee, and they figured out that the chimpanzee was infected with Ebola. So I knew that whole story. Chimpanzee can be infected with Ebola. Gorillas can be infected with Ebola. Don't eat gorilla meat if you find a dead gorilla in the forest. You didn't need to tell me that twice.
Right.
But then there is the ultimate host, the reservoir host. What was that? Still unknown. So when I first focused in on this, there was the mystery. The reservoir host of Ebola was still unknown. It came out of some creature. It got into a chimp. It got into a gorilla. People scavenged the meat. They got sick. That's how at least several of the remote village Ebola outbreaks have happened in Central Africa.
So there was a mystery there. There was a detective story of trying to figure out originally where this came from.
Story. And the book Spillover is filled with detective stories.
Right.
When there's a new disease, a mysterious new disease, the first thing scientists do is say, what's causing this? And then maybe they find a new virus. And they say, we've never seen this virus before. It's for instance, a novel coronavirus. Where did it come from? We've never seen it in humans before. And then some people deal with the the medical and the public health side, but the people that I've paid attention to deal with that mystery story. This new virus had to come from somewhere.
Right.
I have a chapter in Spillover entitled "Everything Comes from Somewhere."
I thought that was really interesting. Like you're right. Like a virus doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It has to come from an
It has to
animal
come
or
from
something.
somewhere, and viruses can only exist in. Viruses are not cellular creatures. They're little packets of DNA or RNA wrapped in protein and lipids, little capsules that can reproduce themselves if they are in the cell of a cellular creature, animal, plant, fungus, bacterium, or one of the little microbial cellular creatures.
This might be a dumb question. Has there been a plant to human spillover event
Not
of a
that
virus?
not that is known.
Okay.
I looked for that. The people looking for the Ebola reservoir looked at plants. They looked at insects. They looked at spiders. There's a guy, wonderful fellow named Robert Swanepoel in South Africa. I went to South Africa to talk to him about this. Spent 2 days listening to him talk. He was the one who did some of the early systematic searching in his laboratory for the Ebola virus in all these different kinds of creatures. And as of this point, as far as I know, it has still not been found in a reservoir host.
Wow.
What people say, well, there's evidence of Ebola and this or that. What they're talking about is fragmentary evidence, like use PCR testing and you can get evidence of stretches of genome. You can do other things that that give you evidence of antibodies against Ebola that show that this organism has been exposed to Ebola. But the gold standard is to be able to isolate live virus out of that creature. And as far as I know, in terms of most of the different kinds of Ebola, there are several different kinds of Ebola, that gold standard has not yet been met to identify a reservoir host, although large fruit bats are certainly the leading suspects.
Yeah. Something that you said in your book that I thought was interesting was, I guess the way Ebola kind of pops up and kills a bunch of people and then disappears for a while, makes it very hard to kind of track it. So it's a good thing for health that it's not constantly killing people, but it's kind of a bad thing for the science of trying to figure out where it's coming from.
And it's sort of a catch-22, as these researchers told me when I was asking them about this. When there's an outbreak, then it's a medical emergency and everybody is focused on isolating cases and treating people, trying to prevent the spread, medical and public health issues. And as they say, you can't do science under those circumstances. You can't go in there and tell people, well, never mind that you're dying. I'm trying to find the reservoir host of this creature. That doesn't happen. And then when the outbreak is over, the money goes away and the public interest goes away.
Right. Oh, we fixed it.
Yeah, it's gone.
Over.
And that, this coronavirus has gone so far now that it's going to be difficult for people, once it's under control, once we've dealt with it, no matter how terrible it's been, or maybe not so terrible, it's going to be difficult, but not impossible, for people to forget how unprepared we were for this one. We need people to remember and be better prepared for the next one. That's the crucial thing, with whether it's Ebola or coronavirus or whatever. I mean, SARS, 2003.
Right.
A novel coronavirus coming out of a bat in China. Killed 774 people, and we were lucky, and they controlled it. The disease detectives that I know, including some that worked that outbreak, say that was the scariest one. That was much more scary than Ebola because it could have gone so big. Why didn't it? Did it burn out, as some people say? No, SARS didn't burn out. SARS was stopped. It was stopped by good, fast science, good, rigorous public health, centralized, strong governments and healthcare systems in the cities that it happened to get to, and luck. But it was a lesson. 17 years ago, SARS, coronavirus. The lesson went unlearned. We were completely unprepared for this one.
Well, let's start talking about this one then. I know that like Ebola kills a lot more, has a lot higher death rate, but it's a lot harder to transmit. Whereas this is what's the R? Is it the R value? Is that what it's called? The number of people that can infect other
Yeah,
people?
it's called the basic reproduction rate, or the
Okay.
yeah, and they in the mathematical models they use an R with a zero hanging low in front of it, which they call R naught, NOUGHT, as in R nothing. R is zero. That's the basic reproduction rate, meaning in a naive population, an unexperienced population, that's the rate at which each single case infects additional cases. So if R naught is 3, that means every infected person coming into a naive population infects on average 3 people. And that's an important number. It's not the
Yeah.
only important number, but it's one of them.
Well, I'm going to assume, being who you are and what you do, you've talked to a lot of experts, and um, you're pretty much an expert in this.
I'm not an expert. I'm just a guy who listens to experts.
Okay, well, that's, I like to think of myself like that. Let's just start with, how bad is this?
It's an unfortunate coincidence, and I don't think it's an etymological fact that the words pandemic and panic sound so similar.
Right.
That's unfortunate.
There's a subconscious thing that our brains do when we hear
Yes,
that.
pandemic. Okay, so I should panic in the pandemic.
Right.
Well, no, panic is really counterproductive. Sometimes people ask me, how scared should I be? How worried should I be?
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be condescending, but I don't like to answer that question. I tend to politely say that's the wrong question. The right
Mm-hmm.
question is, what should I do? Don't lose
Right.
sleep. Get a good night's sleep. Even if you're going to die tomorrow, get a good night's sleep. Some people say, I published this 500-page book, Spillover, about emerging diseases, scary viruses, and people who haven't read it sometimes say, oh, okay, well, what's the bottom line? Are we all going to die? And without wanting to be snotty, I say, yeah, we're all going to die. We're all going to die. We're all going to pay taxes, and we're all going to die. But most of us are not going to die of Ebola,
Right.
or even novel coronavirus. So how bad is it? Well, there's a high degree of unpredictability because human behavior is unpredictable,
Mm-hmm.
and B, the evolution of this kind of virus is unpredictable. So you put those two kinds of unpredictability together, and you get a wide range of possible outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
Even now, when the world is alert to this, the alarm bells are ringing loud, we still don't know, how people and communities and societies and nations are going to behave, how we're going to respond, whether it's going to be smart or stupid, slow or fast, lucky or unlucky. And B, we don't know what the virus is going to do. Is the virus going to change? Is it going to adapt? The more people it infects, the more times it is replicated. The more times it replicates, the more times it varies in terms of its genome.
Mm-hmm.
The more times it varies, the more chances it has to adapt in new ways. Which direction might it go? It might possibly adapt toward being less virulent, but not necessarily. There are cases that show possibilities both ways. So back to your question, how bad is this? It's really a serious situation. Why is it really a serious situation? Because it could be really, really bad. Will it necessarily be? No, not necessarily, if we do the right things and if we are lucky.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a coin that somebody has flipped, and you can look at it flashing and turning in the air, and you don't know whether it's going to land heads or tails. And if you can't predict that, you can't predict what's going to happen with this outbreak, with this pandemic.
We have to start using that word now.
Yeah.
So
We're allowed to start using that word, and it's now official. I mean, allowed, quotation marks. It's now official. I try to be careful. The big Ebola event in West Africa of 2014, which I got pulled into again a lot as a talking head.
Sure.
I tried to be careful to remember not to call that a pandemic, because that was a really bad. First there's an outbreak, and then if it spreads through a country, it's an epidemic, and if it spreads to a lot of countries on different continents, it's a pandemic. You know, there are no absolutely firm boundaries or definitions, but that's sort of the consensual way those words are used.
Yeah.
Ebola 2014 was not a pandemic. This is a pandemic.
Yeah. Well, you were saying earlier that there were some people that were uh, ringing some warning bells about this back in late December, early January. What were the facts about this particular virus that got people so concerned so early? Like, what is it about this that really stands out amongst flu and all the other things that are out there?
Well, here's the way I understand it.
Okay.
From what's been available to read. In early middle December, people who worked in the Huanan wholesale seafood market in the city of Wuhan started getting sick. Fever, other symptoms, and then some of them getting really sick. And then a few of them died. Apparently, according to which source you look at, somewhere between 27 and 40 people got really sick. Scientists, well, not scientists, but people in the hospitals started noticing this, including that wonderful man, the ophthalmologist, and I should remember his name.
Dr. Lin or Lee or something like that?
Yeah.
I think I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, and we should, when you put this together, get his name so we can insert, so you can insert his name. That wonderful ophthalmologist who became the first whistleblower. Right. He started telling friends, look, there's weird shit going on at my hospital. People are coming in with this febrile coughing disease, and it's not flu, and we don't know what it is, but it's scary. And he told some of his friends about that. And that started to spread the word. And he got in trouble. He got, got muzzled for that. He got in trouble for, I think, for putting something online about that. And then, of course, he got sick and died. He became the sort of the first martyr.
And he was pretty young.
And he was young and had no comorbidities, as far as I know.
Right.
Yeah, he was young and healthy.
Yeah, so all these people that are like, oh, I'm young, it's not going to affect me. It's like, you know, the guy who blew the whistle.
Yeah. He may also have gotten a large initial dose of the virus.
Oh, sure.
Because he was in that hospital.
Yeah.
We don't know. Anyway, so that's what, so then on New Year's Eve, the disease detectives that I know started getting bulletins saying, uh-oh, there seems to be a new one happening in Wuhan, China. That was on New Year's Eve.
And was that the majority of the fear? It's just this is a brand new thing and we know nothing about it. That's kind of, and it's spreading and it's scary.
Yes, yeah. Okay. That was the sort of signal that they got. And I don't think at that point anybody was using the word coronavirus, because I don't think the virus had been isolated. But then pretty soon after that, the virus was isolated thanks to a heroic team of scientists, I believe at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. So then there was they isolated the virus and they sequenced it. So then there was a molecular sequence, and it was clear from the molecular sequence that it was a coronavirus. Related to SARS, but not too closely related to SARS, but SARS, MERS,
right.
They all belong in this family of coronaviruses. Now, coronaviruses are on the watch list because they're one of the families of viruses that evolve quickly. And scientists have been saying that for a long time. I've been saying that for 8 years because scientists were telling me, watch out for coronaviruses. They mutate frequently, therefore they evolve quickly. Therefore, they have the potential to jump from an animal, non-human animal host into a human and cause real problems. So this is then early January, and people are saying, uh-oh, it's a new coronavirus. Oh boy, we remember SARS. We got to take this really seriously because it seems to be highly transmissible, and it has it has a case fatality rate that's considerably higher than the flu. And if it spreads as far as the flu, that means disaster. So that was early mid-January that
Yeah.
the experts were saying that to one another. And then
Okay.
they were saying, the disease detectives were saying, well, where did this come from? Um, it was in this live animal, this market, this so-called wet market in China. Evidently it was there. What did it come from? And then some scientists, again, Chinese scientists at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, with international partners, including some of the disease detectives I know, such as Peter Daszak of EcoHealth Alliance, they published a paper noting that this was very similar, very, very, very similar to a virus that had been found 3 years earlier in bats in a cave in Yunnan, China. So then they said, okay, we think this is a bat-borne coronavirus, and that's how it got into the market. Did it spread to 27 people or 40 people originally from one little tiny bat the size of a mouse? Probably not. So it must have gone into another animal, caught hold there, replicated. That animal became an amplifier host, that's the term. And then that animal probably somehow spread it to a number of humans, probably by getting butchered and
Yeah.
and sold.
So the bat, is the bat considered the reservoir host, or the other animal that you were just talking about? Is
The
that
bat
considered?
is considered the reservoir host. The
Okay.
other animal is considered the amplifier
Amplifier.
host.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so that could have been a pig or a,
Could have been a pig,
I mean,
or
anything.
in the case of SARS, they reckon that it was a civet,
Right.
which is a kind of mammal. And in this case, there's been speculation. There was speculation at one point that it was a snake, but that seemed to be wrong. That seemed wrong to a lot of scientists immediately. And then I saw some speculation that it was a pangolin.
Right. The scaly anteater looking
Scaly
thing.
thing that looks like an anteater or an armadillo, but is a unique group of animals. I think there's 6 species. Most of them are endangered. They're traded. They're highly valued for their scales, but also for their meat. They really suffer from this live animal for food and live animal for medicine trade that's so big in China. So there was some speculation that it was a pangolin. I don't know if that hypothesis has been confirmed.
Yeah, they haven't figured that out yet.
I don't
What
think so.
the amplifier host was.
I don't think so.
Okay.
At least I haven't seen that scientific paper. Case fatality rate or case fatality risk is essentially the death rate.
Right.
And basic reproduction number is this R naught thing. How many cases from each case?
Right.
And
that's pretty high with this particular one?
well, if they're just high enough. Just
okay.
I think last I saw, they were saying between 2 and 3. So if it's 2 to 3, it means your pandemic is growing constantly. And when the numbers get big, the growth gets big. What happened with SARS is that they managed to get that R naught down below 1. When you get it down below 1 so that you've contained the cases and each case is not infecting 2 other cases, then you can get a handle on it.
Okay. And we do not have that yet.
We do not have that yet. We're probably not going to have that with this. We're probably going to have to deal with it spreading through our communities and our countries because it's already in so many places. We're going to have to deal with it by slowing the rate of infection so that our healthcare systems can deal with the number of cases that we have over a longer period of time.
Yeah.
So all of the social distancing, the hand washing and all of that, that's really important because that can slow the rate at which it moves through communities. And if it moves through communities more slowly, then that means there are more likely to be hospital beds for both your grandfather and your grandmother. And if it moves through quickly, there might only be 1 hospital bed open for those 2 people you love so much.
And that's what they're dealing with in Italy right now, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yes. They're dealing with horrible choices and horrible situation in Italy.
We haven't in the United States dealt with anything like this maybe since the Spanish flu or something, right? I mean,
Right? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the so-called Spanish flu, which probably didn't come
which
from Spain. Yeah, right. The
I
flu
know
of
the story about
1918.
that is because Spain was neutral in World War One, and so they were reporting on it, so it became known as the Spanish flu. Had some
Very
people,
good.
yeah.
Your memory is better than mine.
Also,
But
I wasn't
that
around
was
back
quite an
then.
event, quite a story. Yes, and this is the biggest thing since then in terms of infectious disease in America, in the world.
You know, so it feels like every other year
I
there's
should
another SARS, there's another.
I should clarify what I just said.
Go ahead.
The biggest thing I said is this is the biggest thing since the flu of 1918 in terms of infectious disease in the world. That's incorrect.
Okay.
There are a couple of things, including something called AIDS, that are important to
I've heard of
remember.
it.
Yeah, 35. Are we up at 35 million deaths at this point?
Mm.
So, and that is a zoonotic disease. Also, that came originally from one chimpanzee. A
Yeah.
virus that came from one chimpanzee has caused the entire, virtually the entire AIDS epidemic. So we have dealt with other horrible epidemics. The AIDS epidemic has been a slow motion epidemic because the disease kills slowly and because it transmits relatively slowly. This is a fast one, similar to the 1918 influenza.
With your experience covering this in other countries around the world, like, is there any country that really handles it well or is best prepared for it, or?
Well, there are
How do you
countries that
focus on
learned from the SARS epidemic,
it?
and places that learned, cities that learned. Hong Kong learned, Taiwan learned, Japan apparently learned pretty well.
Okay.
South Korea, I think, learned somewhat. We learned zero from SARS, it seems. Will we learn from this? I sure hope so.
Mm.
I sure hope so.
But you're saying there is stuff we need to learn.
Yes,
Okay.
preparedness. Yes, yeah. There is stuff we need to learn. There are lessons that should have been heeded after SARS and have got to be heeded after this one. Because why? Because this one is not the last one. There will be
Right.
more.
I think that's a point I will definitely want to make in the video, is that this is kind of just the beginning. That was something I kind of got from your book. I think that's a point that you made, and correct me if I'm saying this wrong, but that as we encroach into more animal territories around the world and
Yeah.
become more dense, this is just something that's going to keep happening, right?
Yes, it is. And that's what I say in my book. I mean, this is not an independent event that is happening to us. This is part of a pattern, a consistent drumbeat of events that reflect things that we are doing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been going on at least since 1961. I can recite a whole list of zoonotic outbreaks that either were bad or could have been bad. Viruses coming from wildlife, getting into the human population, killing people, either a few or a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And in most cases, it's because, why? Because do those animals seek out humans to give them the virus? Does the virus seek out humans? No. Viruses respond to opportunity. They don't have goals. They don't have purposes. They respond to opportunity. They do evolve.
Yeah.
And if a human kills a chimpanzee and butchers it, it is presenting itself as an alternate host for whatever virus is living in that chimpanzee. It is
Mm-hmm.
giving that virus an opportunity to jump to a new host.
A much more populous host.
Exactly. If the virus happens to jump from chimpanzees into humans, that virus and finds that it can evolve and adapt and replicate and transmit from human to human, then that virus has won the sweepstakes, because chimpanzees are threatened and their numbers are decreasing and our numbers are huge and increasing.
Mm-hmm.
So that virus achieves great evolutionary success if it makes that opportunistic leap.
So my dog sneezed the other day. Am I going to die?
Joe, are you going to die? Yes. I'm sorry to say you are going to die.
Oh, we're back to that question again.
Maybe not for 40 years until you step in front of a bus.
I hope so.
But probably not because your dog sneezed on you.
Yeah.
There is talk about dogs. I think there was one case.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, there is. Yeah. There's one case. that is of greater interest to social media than it is to science, I believe, where somebody found evidence in the nostrils of a dog of coronavirus. Now, finding evidence doesn't necessarily mean finding live coronavirus that was replicating and getting ready to jump out on next time that dog sneezes. It might just mean that that dog was exposed, and lots of dogs will get exposed to this. And few, if any of them, are likely to come down with the disease COVID-19,
Yeah.
let alone spread it to anybody else, because dogs are different enough from humans, and this virus may have passed from a bat into a human, but that does not mean it can pass from a human into a dog.
So what is it about bats? You may have spoken about this in your book, but what is it about them that makes them such great reservoir hosts? It seems like I keep hearing that over and over again.
A couple of things are relevant to the question, why bats? And the question, why bats, is asked because bats seem to be overly represented as reservoir hosts
Right.
of scary new viruses. Seem to be overly represented. Now, that involves two things. One, bats are the most diverse order of mammals that exists.
Oh, okay.
There are a lot of different kinds of bats. 1 in every 4 species of mammal is a species of bat.
Wow. Okay. I
1
knew it
in
was a lot,
4.
but that's a lot.
Yeah, 1 in 4. So they seem to be overrepresented, maybe because they're overrepresented in the diversity of mammals.
Okay.
But they probably are overrepresented even beyond that. Why else? Well, they may carry more viruses, more active viral presence than the average mammal. Why would that be? Well, they live a long time. A little bat can live up to 20 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
A little mouse is going to live 2 years if it's lucky. A
Yeah.
little bat might live 20 years. Roosting, how? Well, roosting with 60,000 other bats, like a big carpet in a cave,
Yeah.
the wall of a cave, cuddled in there, 3 bats deep with their babies hanging to them and their, other bats on all sides. That's a great environment for exchanging viruses. You talk about social distancing. That's not social distancing.
Yeah.
So bat viruses are passed probably very readily from one bat to another. And then finally, their immune systems seem to be different, and it seems probable that their immune systems might tolerate the presence of alien DNA or RNA, such as an infection, a viral infection, might tolerate that presence of alien DNA or RNA more than the average mammal immune system. Why is that? Well, possibly because bats are the only mammal that fly. Flying puts a lot of stress on their metabolism. Putting stress on their metabolism in some cases seems to release free DNA from their own cells getting beat up and broken open. Free DNA floating in their bodies, even if it's their own, can possibly be a target of their immune systems. So if bats had rigorous immune systems like us, they might be suffering from autoimmune disease most of the time. So they seem to have downregulated immune systems. Everything I just said is hypothetical at this point, but it's one of the possible explanations.
I've always liked bats,
I like
and
bats too.
they're pretty cool. But I remember one time I was working downtown, and I was walking a couple blocks to get some food, and I I was about to cross the street. I was waiting for the light to turn green, and I saw on the other side what looked like a baseball cap or something, just kind of like doing this on the ground. And as I got closer, it was a bat that was on its back, and its wings were kind of out like this, and it was freaking out, and something was wrong. So I kept walking.
Yeah.
And I mean, this was years ago. I'm just saying, but like,
Well, probably a wise move, because bats also carry probably more than their share of rabies
that's what I was thinking. Yeah.
relative to some other animals. I mean, raccoons in the eastern U.S. are inflicted with a lot of rabies. Foxes might have rabies. Skunks maybe. Bats, yeah, it's always something that you need to think about. I mean, when I was a kid, one of the nuns from the Catholic school I went to, who knew that I was a nature nerd, brought a bat to school in a jar to give to me that they had caught in the attic of their convent. she brought this live bat and she gave it to me. And of course, I took it home and put it in a cage in my bedroom and tried to feed it. My parents, my saintly parents, said, yeah, okay, it's another thing in your bedroom. And they let me. I can remember taking this bat out of the cage at one point, wearing wearing knit gloves, like, those knit gloves. And this poor bat, I didn't know how to take care of it. I didn't know what it needed. I only had it for about a day, but I handled it at one point with these knit gloves, and it went like this, like that. And it bit down, and it bit right through the knit glove and missed my finger. And at that point, I thought, I think this bat deserves his freedom.
Not the
So
best
I took it
kind of
outside. But the other thing about the bat that you saw on the ground, it might have been a healthy bat that simply couldn't fly up off of the ground, because bats generally can't stand on their feet like a crow and get air under their wings and take off, because they can't stand on their feet at all. So bats can only take flight by dropping from some kind of a height. I've run into that too, a bat on the ground flapping around. I ended up putting it on a broomstick and running around in the yard trying to, to throw it up in the air and give it a little chance to get some air under its wings. I think that I succeeded when I did that, but I can't remember.
Just throw it up into a tree. I actually put a bat box behind our garage back here, and I was reading up about what you just said, that they have to have like 12 feet or something to be able to swoop down. Because there's some in our neighborhood, we'll go walk the dogs and I see some flapping around, and none of them have taken up residence here. They don't like my house.
No bats in your bat box yet, huh?
I don't know what to do. Well, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but why don't we wrap up by, I want to do kind of a best worst case scenario thing. So let's just say the social distancing works and everybody's washing their hands the right way, and we're able to manage it. What does that look like? And then what does the opposite of that look like, where people just don't take it seriously in it?
There's a very interesting article in the New York Times today by Sherry Fink, wonderful science and medical writer, Sheri Fink, works for the New York Times, has also authored one interesting book that I know of on this question. It's a question that was discussed at the CDC. The CDC called together some of their mathematical modelers, also some academic mathematical modelers, put them on conference calls beginning, I think, in mid-January. And they started saying, look, let's get some models and see what the best case and the worst case scenario is of this. And they continued these meetings. Their findings have not been released to the public. Sherry Fink got a hold of some of this and reported it in the Times today. I'm now citing from memory. She was talking mostly about the worst case scenario, and I believe they said the worst case scenario might be somewhere between 96 million and 150 million Americans infected.
This is best case?
That's worst case.
It's worst case. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, but that's almost half of the population, 150 million Americans. And to the best of my memory, in terms of deaths, the worst case scenario was between 500,000 and 1.7 million, according to their modeling. But that modeling may have been done in February. Things are changing fast. Anyone who's interested in this question, worst case scenario, and this CDC modeling, they should find Sherry Fink's article in the New York Times of Friday the 13th, 2020, 13th of March, 2020.
Okay. Well, I think that gets me everything I'm looking for here. Trying to think of something else. I'm sure I'll think of it as soon as we stop talking, but I really do appreciate you doing this. You certainly didn't have to, and this has been really cool. I will now go wrap myself in saran wrap and never talk to anybody again.
Good luck with that. Good luck. Joe, stay healthy, stay sensible, and keep smiling.
Sounds like a plan.
Okay. Good to talk to you.
All right. I appreciate it, David. All right. Thanks for watching that. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you stuck around all the way to the end, if you're watching me talk right now, you are a very special human being, and I like you. I mean that. So yeah, this video is coming at you without a sponsor, and videos like this apparently are being demonetized on YouTube, or at least at the time that I'm recording this, they're being demonetized. So if you want to throw a buck in the tip jar as a thank you or whatever, I can point you to my Patreon page. It's patreon.com/answerswithjoe. Look, I totally get it if you can't do it right now. Times are really uncertain. Don't worry about it. I still like you. But yeah, this coronavirus situation is not going anywhere for a while. So if you're interested in hearing some more interviews from people in the know, I think I'll be doing some more of those in the future. Or I might talk to people who are experts in totally different subjects, because I think we're going to get pretty tired of hearing about COVID-19 after a while. Totally get that. And I might actually use this platform and these kinds of interviews to maybe, I don't know, raise money for coronavirus charities. I would love to hear your thoughts on that. But yeah, thanks again for watching. Thanks again to David for taking the time to talk with me. And yeah, let's just get through this thing together. Just keep smiling. That's all I can say. Love you guys. Take care.